Guys, I want to welcome you to another episode of the Advisory Board Podcast, where we bring in experts all around the franchising industry to help you learn how to run your business better and avoid some of the pitfalls a lot of you have already stepped into before. I've got a friend of mine with me here. It's Brian Bush. He's the founder and CEO of Elite Media Team, great guy. You're going to enjoy Brian today. Not just a great Midwestern guy. I mean, he doesn't root for the best baseball team out there in the universe as I do, unfortunately. But Brian's actually been a baseball coach like I have a little longer, actually, and all the way through the collegiate level. So I stopped at high school. So hats off to you for that, Brian. And
I miss it. I do miss it. Don't do it anymore. And I do miss it. Yeah.
Every day, like it's springtime. The team I used to coach is playing in a tournament right now, 4 hours away from me. So I know what that's like. It's so much fun, but it's chaotic. So
it is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, we're going to talk today about media, guys. So it's interesting because a lot of you out there don't believe that mass media, television and radio and things like that are as effective. You don't know how to attribute them. You struggle to know, how can I get ROI out of this? I see people using it. I think they're wasting money. And that's all. Most of what I just said is a myth, right? Like there's actually a ton of success in this. Brian's cracked the code. He's been in it for 30 years. He's the CEO of this organization, Elite Media Team, and he's also a great human being. Married for 30 years, had his first granddaughter, a man of faith, which I appreciate as well. So, Brian, I want to welcome you to the show and tell us just a little bit more about you and about Elite Media Team, and we'll jump into the topic together.
Sure. Yeah. We're a full service advertising agency. We do everything here except don't get involved at all in the web dev stuff. It's just a nightmare. I'm glad there's experts that do that because we don't want to be involved in that. But everything else media wise, we primarily consider ourselves more a brand. I hate the term branding. We get into that a little bit later. I much prefer a term called bonding than to branding, and I'll explain the difference. But anywhere from branding to media strategy to, obviously the digital world's very big right now. But the principles that make a really good TV campaign or a really good radio campaign are pretty much the same principles that make really good Facebook campaigns and YouTube campaigns and the other. There's nuances, and you've got to talk to the dog in the language of the dog in the certain medium, but the principles are the same. And so, we've got a full service production division here, which helps us a lot with content. And so, we don't have to rely on other people to create things for us. And so I started on the sales side in the media. I spent many years selling what I now buy. And so I was able to learn all the, behind the scenes things. And, the people that work at media companies, and I'm sure everybody here has gotten those phone calls all the time. Hey, I'd like to help your business. How can I help you out? They are trained, pretty well on how to sell it. That's what their job is. What most really have never learned how to do, and what I became obsessed with when I was on that side of things, was how to make it work. And I realized, if I can figure out the way to make this work, selling it becomes really easy. Like, here's the results we're seeing for other people. Would you like to join as well? And so that's what I was just obsessed with, all the different nuances of what makes advertising work and why really became my obsession. And so once I started to develop a system of results, I started to have clients that just worked with me in my radio station that were like, hey, can you help me with my other advertising? And so I began to do that for other people. And, it just kind of organically grew from there to now where, we're an organization of 10 plus employees. And, we've moved 3 times to keep growing out of the buildings that we're in. Our lease is up here in August, and I'm trying to determine, do we need to make another move or not? But yeah, it's been a nice adventure. It's been good. We've been blessed.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear it. There's a lot that's been shifting, right, in this environment of mass media buying. I mean, obviously, in the last several years, the popularity of non-traditional television watching has grown. Podcasting and things has grown. Radio's not dead, but radio is different now. Radio's iHeartRadio, or it's Pandora, or it's Spotify, right? So this whole landscape's been kind of torn apart, and yet a lot of folks have stayed on top of it and still have this understand how to apply these principles across mass media buying. So tell us what's changing right now. What are some of the key trends that you see in the space?
Yeah, I think what you said is things are, I don't know if they're rapidly changing, but they are certainly changing. It's interesting you say that though, is because I think of a comment that Jeff Bezos made, and
Mhm.
they asked him the question. He said, "Oh, everybody always comes to me, and wants to know, what's the next big thing, right?" He said, "Nobody ever asked me what still works." And we seem really obsessed about chasing that shiny new toy, and so we've taken an approach here where it's like, yes, you've got to implement some of these new things, but you don't want to necessarily completely walk away from the things that you built your business on and they're growing your business. But yes, in terms of what's new, you look at, I'm sure you've seen that diagram before that shows all the different things you can do with marketing technology, and it's like 10,000 different things that you can be doing. Whether it's Facebook or YouTube or email marketing or whatever it may be, and this whole idea that I'm just going to try this, see if it works, and if it works, I'm going to try something else. That's a prescription for bankruptcy, is the bottom line. I mean, you just can't, you can't go into it, thinking there's too many options that are out there and too many things you can do that are not going to be successful for you, that you can't just do like a trial and error run. And if you were going to go to see a cardiologist next week, you wouldn't be really excited if he told you that, we're going to do some A/B testing and see what we come up with for your plan for your heart. You want somebody that's going to know, this is the strategy and how you get, this is how you fix the heart. This is the medicine that you need. This is what you need. And so, I think that shiny new toy, sometimes people gravitate because they're looking for that silver bullet, that this is the thing that's going to change everything. And unfortunately, that doesn't exist. You've got to have a strategy in place that is really based on very sound marketing principles, because it's not easy. But let me answer your question a little better. I think the biggest area of change right now is probably in that connected TV space. The reason I say that is because with the number of people that have cut the cord, people are consuming their TV differently. And so it's like, okay, how are we going to reach that person? And it's been a challenge on our end for that, because I've been on the forefront of this since it really came out, kind of mainstream about 4 or 5 years ago. And I fell in love with it the minute it was pitched to me, of like, look, this is a way that you can target by zip code. You can target by what people are interested in. You can target, all these different ways. And I'm like, great, sign me up. Let me see a proposal. And I still remember the first one I got, and it was from a TV rep that was in Raleigh, North Carolina. Guy's name's Reggie. Reggie's one of my favorite reps. He's a great guy. The station was an ABC station, so they were owned by Disney. And so it was kind of the first like Hulu type pitch of doing connected TV. And he sends it to me. And I look at it and I'm like, Reggie, there's like a typo or something on this. he said, what do you mean? I said, well, it says this is $6,500. And he said, yeah, that's the price. And I said, well, and I talked about the number of impressions that I was getting. I said, Reggie, I get those same number of impressions with less than $500 on television. Said, yeah, but it's not targeted. And I said, yeah, but $500 versus $6,500. I said, there's just that math that it just can't work. And so, that's kind of the challenge of the connected TV world, is on a cost per thousand basis. It's so much more expensive than what you can buy traditional mass media for, that if you need to hyper target, if you're an auto repair dealer and you're only pulling clients from a few mile radius, right, in Los Angeles, connected TV is awesome, right? Because you can't afford Los Angeles DMA TV. But if you're a home improvement company that serves your whole DMA, and the targeting you need is basically, oh yeah, they own a house. Well, now that targeting isn't 10 times the value in terms of being critical. And so that's kind of where the connected TV things gets interesting. What I've been waiting for, and what's starting to happen, is it's starting to come down. As more people are consuming that way, the price is coming down, and it's coming down and down and down. And it's to the point now where there's places where we are making strong recommendations for our clients that even a year ago, we were saying, don't touch it. But now it's making more sense than it did before. And we're pretty excited about what we're seeing in that space. And now I gave you the negative of that space. The positive of that space is you can start to do some of the optimization that you can do via Facebook and all that. I mean, you run stuff on like Amazon Prime, and you get that commercial served based on the shopping patterns of somebody living there. And all of a sudden, the value of that really starts to rise. It's just, it really is a better tool to use as an add-on, at least for now, than it is to completely replace your mass media programming at this point in time.
Awesome. No, I think it's a great way to look at it. With, if you don't mind, I'm actually genuinely curious personally also about the audio side of this, right? Like there's so many people
Yeah.
listening to Audible, so many people on Spotify, so many people on on anything, Pandora, you name it, right? How do you see the audio only non-visual market playing into this as well? Is that an area you guys do a lot of work too?
It is. I love the podcasting market. Ironically, we're on a podcast, but I love that market. I believe there's a good percentage now of that radio listener that has moved to podcasting, and so that's the same type of thing. The targeting I mentioned on the connected TV side, you can do that same type of targeting on the podcasting side, and we've seen some pretty cool things from it in terms of what people have been able to generate. One of our roofing guys recently told me about the massive commercial job that they landed just because of the podcast that it was on the CNN podcast, and it turned into a really big deal because they were kind of right place, right time, which that space allows you to do as well. And I will tell you, I was compared to kind of that connected TV CPM, the podcasting is a little more reasonable in my opinion, and it's very competitive with traditional radio. And so we're doing a good amount in that area as well, and we've seen some positive things, and it's trackable to a certain degree, which is also nice.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because I think a lot of people they listen to this like yeah, this works for some people, not for me, blah blah blah. What you've talked about some of the strategies that are working. I want to dive into that more, but I also want to pause for the naysayers, if you don't mind. Like, when you say that it's working, I think a lot of people are concerned. I can't attribute that, but I can't attribute mass media. So if I can't attribute it, I can't measure ROI. So I'm not going to put money into it. Recipe for bankruptcy. That's a good phrase for it.
Yeah.
How do you tackle the attribution side of things for true mass media, radio and traditional TV type stuff versus these now connected devices or streaming devices where you can do more targeting? How do you recommend people start to approach attribution so they can measure ROI?
Yeah, when you're doing it right, the best way to measure attribution is still top line sales, and that's sometimes hard to say, but or hear, because you're like, okay, that's great, but when you do it right, you see enough of an impact in top line sales. I'll give you an example. One of our clients is a dealer in the insulation world, and when we first started working with him, like clockwork, about 6-7 years in a row, about $750,000 a year was about their revenue.
Yeah.
We started a media campaign for them, 4 or 5 years ago, and year one, went from $750,000 a year to over 2 million. Year two went from 2 million to 5 million.
Wow.
5 million to 10. All the way up to like $20 million in that same DMA. Wow. In that same market. Now they expanded. It allowed them to expand. But when you do it right, you get results like that, and you're not worried about micro attribution at that point. You're like, it's obvious how well that's working. So top line sales is always the most important number, and there is such a fine line between, you got to know your numbers, right? I mean, you have to know your numbers, you have to know success. But when you get too far down in the weeds, the example I like to make with people is when you ride a jet ski, you got to look at the horizon. If you start looking right in front of you, you're going to dump that thing. And it's really the same way with your advertising. If you so micromanage it, then you're just going to constantly make mistake after mistake. But to answer your question, we start with top line sales, and then from there we drill down. And so then what's great, if you're in a thing like home services or areas where people are actually you're setting appointments,
right?
You can ask the question. They can put it on your form. How did you hear about us? And when you're doing the media the right way, you often get people that say, yeah, I saw you on TV. Yeah, I heard you on the radio. So you get that feedback. The mistake that people make is only attributing the TV and radio to the people that say it. That's the mistake. Because think about the way you consume your media and how you buy things. You see an ad, you barely notice it. You see it a number of other times. Eventually, you think, I'm kind of curious about this. And so what do? You Google it.
Mm-hmm.
And you go to their Google My Business page, or you go to their website, then you contact them. And then, especially in this day where tracking's done so well, somebody fills out a web form, it's got a UTM code on it. Say, oh, look at that. My PPC campaign is working so great. But what caused the person to do that search in the first place? Like that's the big thing. And we've done some deep research on this with our clients. And what we find is that about half of their pay-per-click clients are coming from people that are searching them by name. And you're searching them by name because you know who they are. And that's another key factor. And then we go into the Google My Business, and in the Google Business Profile, they've got a tool in there, and it only shows you 6 months worth of data, but every month they update the searches in there so you can see how people searched to get to your Google Business Profile. And our clients, without fail, their name is always the #1 search term. And so if it's a dental client, it's always the name of the dentist. It's never dentist near me or whatever the name of the city is, dentist. I mentioned insulation. If it's never insulation by itself, it's always the name of the company. It's just, that's not, that don't see that when you don't have a mass media presence the way you do when you do. And it's kind of like the old saying of, there's nothing new under the sun, right? And Google, all Google is now is what the Yellow Pages used to be. It's just the way you found businesses. And there was this company, this is 20 years ago now, maybe 25. There's a company called Toma. It was called Top of Mind Awareness.
Okay.
And it was built, it came out of the newspaper industry. And they had these guys, they did this research on, and they would ask questions, let's say a window company. Name all the window companies you can think of. Name all the roofing companies you can think of. And they listed who these companies were as part of this research. And here's what they found. It's really weird. What they found was when people were newspaper advertisers, they were always better than your top Yellow Page advertiser. And they were trying to sell newspaper ads versus Yellow Pages. Yeah. But then this really weird thing started happening. They started seeing these companies that were at the very top, but they weren't in the newspaper and they didn't have big Yellow Page ads. And what they were finding out is they were 12 months out of the year, either radio or television advertisers. And that was always the top of the window company, always the top. Even today, when you look at who's in the top of your industry, #1, #2 are normally the people that you see on the media all the time, because that's who people know and they like and they trust. So anyway, so the way we do the, and I know I went down a rabbit trail a little bit there, but the way we do the attribution is we use UTM codes, obviously, on the pay-per-click stuff, so we can see that. We have a part of the form that gives it the chance to say somewhere else where they heard about you. So that helps us. And then we use the pay-per-click data and the Google My Business data to see how many people are searching by name and can roughly guesstimate the percentage of internet business that's being generated from the TV and radio.
Yeah. I mean, it can't be a purely exact science because the TV generates call-ins and attribution for call-ins unless you're using tracking numbers. Which is actually really helpful. I wanted to talk about a couple of these ideas too to blend, right? But this general meta-analysis, love it. Now we got to be careful saying meta-analysis. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, you do.
Thanks, Zuckerberg, for screwing that up for us too.
Yes.
Anyway, but one of the thoughts that I'd had too is blended media approaches, right? So I'm guessing you guys do this a lot. Where like one of the most popular ads ever done in Super Bowl history was that stupid QR code that bounced around the screen. Do you remember that? And it crashed all the servers because like 50 million people scanned it at the same time. Anyway, I did not, but I was tempted. But I was like, why the freak would I scan that? But it was clever. I loved the approach. How often do you recommend your clients use things like a QR code embedded on visual media so somebody can scan it and go right to a dedicated page? And now you're knowing web traffic based upon the TV. How often do you recommend those things, and what tends to work best?
Yeah, we use them a lot, and we use flow codes, which are a little, kind of QR codes on steroids. And what we like about the flow codes is, number one, you can put logos on them. They're bigger. They're way easier to scan when you're watching television. And the data is phenomenal, quite frankly, as far as where people are coming from. We use it in a couple of different ways. We use it to measure creative, to see how this commercial performs versus this commercial, because we're not really big on running only one spot at a time. And that's just because we've got our own production division here. So for our clients, we're able to very affordably, we'll do a series of commercials for them for less than they'll go to another production firm and get one commercial, because we believe so strongly in that. And the reason for that is, you and I may have completely different motivations for why we're going to buy something, but we can't have every one of those motivations in every commercial. And it's much better if you make one key point, and your key point's not the same as mine. So I got to have more than one piece of content out there. Mm-hmm. And so it does help us when we use these flow codes to see what creative is working better than another. And then it also gives us an idea of where the leads are coming in from, what time of day they're coming in from, and all that. So big believer on the QR stuff. We've also used them. Sometimes we use them for form fills. We've also used them for direct phone calls. It just depends on, who the client is and the nature of the business.
Yeah. And I mean, call-ins usually have a 70 to 80% schedule rate, right? Like they're a high converting form. So there's nothing wrong with pushing people to a phone. But one recommendation from my perspective, you probably do the same, is if you can do it, and it's not that hard, get tracking numbers, right? Get tracking phone numbers, because then you get data on the back end from that phone service provider that says, hey, you had 37 phone calls that came in through this number over here. Those are all your media buy numbers. So now you've got direct attribution for the leads that came through on those phone numbers.
As long as you understand that that's not the only way people are reaching you. That is, like if you look at it, just that's the number that we got, and we're not going to count any others, you're going to be rudely disappointed. You've got to look at all the other data, because once you do, it really becomes very obvious how well it's working. I mean, when you do it right, the results are such that it becomes blatantly obvious. And a lot of our clients are generating 65, 75, 80% of their revenue from the media that they're doing. Yeah.
Well, you bring up an interesting point there, because it's you have to have a before and after measurement to be able to know, right, that's working. So, I mean, if you're thinking about media, guys, one of the things I'd recommend is, like, today, take a benchmark of these things we're talking about. Take a benchmark of general lead volumes, take a benchmark of how many times people are searching for you by name right now on SEO and PPC. If you take those benchmarks today, and then you go work with a group like Elite Media Team, and then you start doing mass media marketing, you can now see the actual impact. You can measure it with certainty, because you know that. Yeah, and also don't launch mass media and 37 new PPC campaigns and like, you got to be a little more scientific about this, and also a little more frugal, so you can measure true ROI. But do a mass media campaign and give yourself enough time in that. You probably know the right time frame, Brian, but you got to measure it for a certain period of time so it can take hold. It takes a while to get in front of people and become a familiar brand through these things. 17 touches is what I used to hear all the time, and I hear it's more now because of all the channels. But what do you see? Like, how long should somebody plan on running a campaign, mass media campaign, before they're going to really get reliable measurements of success?
We talk to our clients when they start new with us about, this is a 3-year journey that we're on in building up your brand and building up, who you are and making you a household name. The good thing is, there's times we literally, on the first day the campaign runs, people get a lead. My TV ad ran, I already got a call. So you see something from it, like, immediately. But in terms of numbers that you're going to start to feel good about, the first 6 months are going to be tough. I mean, and that's, we tell our clients all that before they give us any money, because we don't want to, and actually one of the things I tell them is, look, 3 months into this, you're going to hate me. And I'm just going to get this out of the way right now before we even start. You're going to, and I tell them that because it's not that your results aren't going to be okay. They're going to be decent. But you're going to question yourself, and you're going to say, could I be spending this money elsewhere and getting better results? And I promise every one of them, they're going to have that moment, and they're going to think of that. And it usually comes the day the invoice shows up. And like, man, I don't know that I want to keep paying, because mass media is not cheap.
Mhm.
And there's a certain, there's a certain element of, you've got to be tall enough to ride this ride in that world. And it is a commitment. And, the first, especially 3 to 6 months, you've truly got to look at that as that seeding money. That is the farmer that's investing in the spring seeding, and the harvest is coming later. And it is not you put the quarter in the gumball machine and the gumball comes out. There is a amount of time that it takes to build that up. And that's hard, because what makes it so hard is a campaign that is not going to be successful and one that is. The first couple of months, they look identical, right? It's just after that the one starts to take off. And that takes a real strong commitment on the part of the person that's writing the check. And we take that very seriously. We know that. And so we try to, especially early, educate them about their expectations. And, quite frankly, it's what's been nice on our end has been the growth of things like Facebook and Home Advisor and some of those kind of cheap lead places, because there's such a dramatic difference in the quality of your lead from the media side compared to those other sources. But
Yeah.
those leads are so cheap that when you blend something together, when you blend a strategy together, that we found seems to work the best, because it keeps their lead volume early on.
Yeah.
That keeps everything going until the mass media benefits can really click in, as you especially get into that second year. That's where you really start to hyper jump from people knowing who you are. And the reason for that probably makes sense. You referenced it the 17 times. I've actually heard 23 times.
Yeah, I mentioned 17 because that's about a 7-year-old statistic, and it's gone
Yeah.
up. It's gone up, and I see 23. I've seen people go as high as 30 and 40, and I think they're just full of crap and they're not measuring anything. But yeah,
Yeah.
23. I mean, I no doubts about that metric in my mind.
Well, where I got 23 from was, it was done in e-commerce, which is, e-commerce is great, right? Because you see the ads, you're exposed to them, you buy the product. They determined it was 23 times, but there's also an element of time that comes into that. You can't just see it 23 times in a week. It was 23 times, and I believe it was over 4 weeks, and that was for a $50 product. And then for a $100 product, it was like 6 weeks, and then a $200 product, it was 8 weeks. So again, if you get into like major home improvements, how long do people need to be hearing about you before they're ready to jump, because they don't know you, they don't like you, they don't trust you yet? And that time frame, and I could go on and on about that. It's the waiting game. If you owned a restaurant, we can make an impact much quicker because everybody eats 3 times a day. If our installation guys that we work with, that's a one-time product. Put foam insulation in the walls. You'll never do that again. So it's not like, the longer the sales cycle, the longer your advertising has to be within that sales cycle, which is why I love I know we're not here to pump up your product, Dave, but I will. That's actually why I like ClientTether so much, because these mass media leads cost so much that if you don't have a program to continue the follow-up and keep going after them, it's really tough to get the ROI that you need without that type of program.
Yeah, there's got to be a good net. Yeah, and not here to talk about us, but it's a good point. Like blending that with something like this, where you're getting the leads and then you're nurturing the leads, and maybe they've touched you 18 times, they're not ready to buy, but we can add 5 more touches. Yeah,
Yes.
and
Yes.
It's the same thing with blended campaigns. You'd mentioned having cheap leads overnight and brand over time,
Yes.
which then generates leads overnight, right?
That's it. That's it. Yes.
But that's, you have to, if you can feather fill the pipe early with the pay for play, really competitive leads.
Yep.
Amazing. And then and some Facebook and some other things. And then you got a really rich marketing blend where you're covering most of the channels that people would be looking in for advice or places of influence. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, we actually create 2 different funnels for our clients, and the one funnel is your cheaper leads, your Facebook leads, your social leads, your PPC leads, even your home advisor leads. We put those in one funnel because your cost per leads there are going to be so much less, but your revenue per appointment is also going to be much less there. And then we kind of view the media leads in a whole separate funnel and explain to people that these leads are going to be by far and away your most expensive leads. Know that going into it, but they're also going to be the highest revenue per appointment leads. They're going to be your highest closing leads. And that's why blending them together really seems to be the thing that works best for our guys.
Yeah, and you also need a way to measure that, right? Like one of the things that I advise people on all the time is you need to be able to track every lead channel. You need to be able to
Mhm.
track lead volumes through that channel and also conversion events through that channel. Like you need to be able to compare all your lead sources and say which ones are producing the highest average job size or ticket size.
That's it. That's
Can't
it.
do that today by lead channel, by zip code. You got a bigger problem on your hands. But how on earth are you going to measure the efficacy of your marketing and know where to put your money next? You have to again benchmark, measure, and then make good decisions based upon this data set that you're generating. That's
Ex-
mission critical stuff.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So let's shift a little bit and let's
Yeah.
talk about some we've talked about some of the strategies that work. And right now we're talking about strategies too, blended media, leading in with some less expensive leads as you're building the value of this mass media campaign. One thing we haven't talked about though is like cost vol like ranges. Now I know like it depends upon the market, depends upon the channel, but if somebody today were like, man, I really want to get started. I want to advise my franchisees in my franchise system to get started with some mass media. Like, what should a franchise brand expect a location to need to invest on a kind of a monthly basis for mass media to even take effect?
Yeah. And you nailed it. It really varies based on market, obviously, right? I mean, Los Angeles, California is going to be dramatically more expensive than Abilene, Texas. I mean, it's just the way it is based on the number of people. But that being said, we're paying more right now for some TV spots in Dayton, Ohio than I am in Los Angeles. You're like, well, how is that? And the reason for that is in Dayton, there's one top dog station that's still to this day, we don't see this in too many markets. The reason I use Dayton as an example, but very rarely you see one station like in their news hour dominate the way this one station in Dayton does, and they still grab 70% of the audience.
Mhm.
And they have actually more viewers than the number 4 station that we're buying in Los Angeles.
Oh,
And
wow.
so it really, we've got a formula that we know that works based on how many viewers you're going to get per dollar.
Mhm.
And so really because of that, we've got some people that are starting out spending as little as like, $1,000 a week. But anything, even in just about any market out there, it's really tough to make anything happen from a mass media perspective for less than that.
Yeah.
And then the flip side of that is we've got others that, again, this is the local, not national, that we're spending, $150,000, a month, just for that one local business. So that's the range. It is, but we're really big believers in being conservative in the beginning and growing it. And so, that's kind of what's worked and been our MO. And those people that are spending 100,000 a month, they used to spend 5.
Mhm.
But it was the results that they saw that came over time. But that's, the cost of entry varies based on market size. But we also advise everybody, look, you got to spend at least this much once
Mhm.
we evaluate the market for them and know their business,
Yeah.
or do something else. Like, don't get into this unless you spend X and unless you can spend X over, Y period of time.
Yeah.
Does
That's
that help?
100%. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
what it tells me though is if you look at the amount of money you're going to spend on, let's say, social media, pay-per-click marketing,
Yeah.
you you can get into that for less, but if you want to have an impact, you've got to be almost around the same amount, or maybe at least 1,500 to 2,000 bucks a month minimum, right? For any of those things to do any good. So if you just said, look,
Yeah. And really,
I
I mean, yeah. And I don't want to mislead your people with too low of a number, because realistically, if you're looking to become like a household name,
Mhm.
and where you're going to dominate your category,
Yeah, it's got to be a
even
lot
in like
lower.
the mid-major markets, that's 20 to 50 grand a month minimum. I mean,
Mhm.
that's really what the cost of admission is there.
Yeah.
But again, you don't have to start at that point. That's just what, and what's nice is there's nothing that's as scalable. Like, to a certain degree, the PPC, you hit a ceiling. The Facebook, you hit a certain ceiling.
Yeah.
Very few people can afford to get to the ceiling on the mass media. So
Uh-huh.
once you start, there really is some great opportunities there for people that have the tenacity to kind of stick through the tough times.
Mhm.
And it's any chuck in a truck can spend $25 a day on Facebook.
Uh-huh.
And that's why people trust you, is because when they see you on television, that instantly raises their level of confidence in your company, because not that many people can afford to be there.
Well, and also, I mean, put it into this perspective, and we should talk about a couple of different customer avatars that we chatted about beforehand too. But who's advertising on Facebook next to you, right? So I'm advertising on Facebook, and it's costs $25 for anyone to do it, right? So here I am, Mr. Legitimate Business Operator of a national franchise that's got a great reputation, and right next to me advertising is um, Stevens Plumbing, and the guy doesn't have a shirt on in his ad, right? I'm being very hyperbolic, right? But
Right.
his cousin Vinny made that ad in his basement. They did a photo shoot in the backyard with his dog and a frisbee. Like it's
Right.
completely, there's no parameter around professionalism. So I see your point. But on mass media, there's an ad for, hey, this is my brand. I do roofs. Let's say I do roofs. And
Yeah.
then right after me is Tylenol, right? Like, if you're not getting the point, watch television for a minute or watch Amazon Prime, and then now that we pay for commercials. But like, you'll see like, oh, the caliber of quality that I'm seeing here is different. And so how does that equate into caliber of leads? Because that's an important part of the discussion today, is people want to get more leads. Lead
Yep.
volumes are down in
Yep.
traditional mediums or
Yep.
media, but
Yeah.
how do they compare versus the cheapo leads you might get off of social?
No, it's a great question. And we talk about the types of customers out there with our clients, and we put them into two different buckets. And we talk about what we call a transactional client, which the transactional client, their biggest fear is paying too much.
Mhm.
So, they want the best deal. They don't care who you are. They just want, whoever you are, somebody else give me a better deal, I'm going to call them. And so they'll call 5 or 6 different companies. They'll go on Home Advisor because they want as many bids as they can possibly get. The other customer, and the one that we kind of focus on more with our mass media messaging, and we do got to talk messaging in a minute because that's a key component to all this. But
Yeah.
that relational customer, their biggest fear is not paying too much; it's hiring the wrong person.
Mm-hmm.
Because they've been a transactional customer before on certain things, and they know what happened, right? So their fear is hiring the wrong person. Look, if I'm going to spend, especially like in home services, right? If I'm going to spend this amount of money,
Mm-hmm.
it better be right, right? And it's more important for me to be right, even if I got to spend an extra $1,000, than it is of the disaster that can happen if it's not. And to your point about the environment, that relational customer who their fear is buying from the wrong person, they are way more likely to respond to your TV ad than they are as to a social media ad, just because of the cost of admission. And then when you tie in the right messaging that talks in the language of that person that's the relational customer, then you've got something. And then you've got, and if you just use yourself an example, think about your own city you're in. If you think about roofing companies, you think about window companies, you think about, whatever industry, jewelers, whatever industry you may be, the ones that are going to come to your mind if you ask yourself, how do I know who they are? You've probably seen them on television or heard about them on the radio in most instances. And it's still a very, very powerful medium for people to grow their business exponentially over kind of all those other things that are out there, which are all good. But I
No.
see those more as, they're more startup things and bonus things, not really the meat of massively growing your company and separating yourself from the other 300 competitors in your market to do the exact same thing that you do.
Right. Yeah, no, I love it. And one thing that I want to share here is also focus, right? Like there's a big difference when you control, somebody's listening to a podcast, and then there's a 30-second clip in the middle of it that they have to listen to so they can get back to the content they really wanted to listen to. What else is there to distract them in that moment? Nothing,
Right.
right?
Right.
When you're watching a television show and that ad comes on, especially if it's the connected device, what else can you do? You have
Yeah.
to watch that so
You
you
have to
can
watch
get
it.
to the next thing. And even if you're talking to your spouse, or like, you're not paying attention, like you're hearing it and you're seeing it, but to make the decision to turn away from it. If I'm on Facebook, whoop, I can swipe right past that thing. I don't even notice them sometimes because they try to make them look like they're posts. And so like sometimes the camouflage of the ads in those other media actually create clutter and make it harder for the branding to settle in. It will over time, right?
Yeah.
But Yeah,
Yeah.
I've bought stuff off of social media before. Like I know it works because I'm a sucker.
Right.
I do it too. But
Right. Yeah.
anyway, but there's a
But
catch.
you know what? Here's what we found is that for our clients that have a big media presence,
Mhm.
everything else, their social works better. Because
Uh-huh.
when people see the social media ad, they know who they are. It's that know, like and trust thing. And
Yeah.
can we go back for 1 second to the cost thing? Because I left out a piece that I think would be very valuable to
Please, yeah, go ahead.
because the everybody when I say mass media, everybody focuses on the media word.
Uh-huh.
They miss the mass word. The secret isn't the media, it's in the mass. It's that you're reaching literally so many people for so little, even though the total dollar is a lot, on a per person basis, there's nothing close. So we're literally, when we're buying TV, our clients are getting a TV screen on somebody's 72-inch television in their living room
Mhm.
for the same price that other people are hitting, that little ad that annoys the crap out of you at the bottom of your phone because it's in the way of the content.
Uh-huh.
Same price per person. So this is the way for basically, we can talk to a homeowner with your message about 10 to 12 times a month, 12 months out of the year, for probably less than $1 per person.
Mm.
Now, not per month, not per message, literally 120 times a year, we're going to whisper in their ear about your company for about $1.
Mm.
That's the magic of mass media. You can't do it. You can't do that anywhere else for that type of amount of money.
Yeah. It's true, and you add the imp or the focus factor on top of that too, versus the little display ad that's in the bottom right corner of the app that I use once a month. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's materially different.
Yes.
I agree. I agree.
I mean, we're literally keeping your company in front of a homeowner the entire year for the cost of mailing them one postcard. That's kind of what it comes down to when you look at it that way.
And by the way, I love postcards too. You guys should be doing those also. But that's not what we're talking
Yeah, I'm not hammering postcards.
Not at all.
I agree. Just from a comparison standpoint, it's like, wow, look at what I can do. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a synergy factor too that you mentioned is that billboard that you throw up on that's on a major thoroughfare in the market that most of the homeowners that are getting into your zips that you're trying to hit are driving past. Like that has an impact too. Like it's a residual value effect that people are seeing and making you feel more local. I think they all play together nicely. Um,
Agreed.
is there like if somebody wanted to get started, and you and I, we should probably start to wrap because we could probably go on for another hour about this. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
for somebody that's trying to evaluate if it's a fit, somebody who wants to or somebody who wants to get started, what are the first couple of things that you feel like they should be doing so they can be ready to successfully deploy mass media marketing or advertising?
I mean, by far and away, the most important part of it is getting the messaging right. If you don't get the messaging right, and that's true not only for this, it's true, and I'll tell you the mistake that most people make with their messaging is nobody wants to watch somebody else's home movies, right? Dave, you might like me, but if you come over, if I pull out the old movies from 15 years ago and show you our family vacation, you're going to get bored pretty quickly.
Uh-huh.
Most commercials are a home movie for that business, and the viewer doesn't care. And so, unless you find a way to make it sticky, and unless you find a way to really bring that person in and touch their felt needs and connect what you have to their, whether it's problem or desires, you're wasting your money. So messaging is by far and away the most important.
And can we talk about that for a minute? Because this is a whole podcast in and of itself. But
It is.
um, you said something. I want to make sure we cauterize this. The marketing message, and this is across every medium. It's not about you. It's not. It's not about
Right.
you. It's about them. It's
Yes.
about them. And I see this inverted so much, like frandev marketing. I see it inverted all over the place where somebody's like, it's chest beating, like #1 franchise, 37 years in a row. Come over and talk. And everyone's like, I don't give a crap. Like,
Right.
why
Right.
should I care about you? How do you help me with my needs and my problems right now? And if you can't localize it that way, you're wasting your money and your time.
Yes. Yes.
So carry on because you're the one preaching here. But I got to say, like, one hallelujah and amen. And can we continue on with that dialogue you're going through about how do you get your messaging right first because it impacts
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. And I mean, kind of what you were saying there is the idea that I think a lot of clients think of it in terms of education. We just need to educate them about this. But no, there's one step prior to that. You need them to care. Like you need them to want to know. Like they don't care, because to them all it sounds like is blah 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 blah. And here's one of the ways that you've fallen into this trap is whatever industry you're in. If you take your name off of it and put your competitor's name on it, and it can say the exact same thing, you're probably just kind of talking about you to a certain degree. Like you're not telling any kind of unique story that connects with the consumer that is all your own. And here's a perfect example where you say, we're committed to integrity, as opposed to the guy that was on before you that's committed to lying. I mean, it just, and there's so many of those throwaway statements that you think, man, if people just believe this about us, well, they're not going to. You've got to connect to them on an emotional level. And early on, we talked about, I mentioned we do branding, and everybody thinks of branding in terms of, it's just been watered down now. They think of branding in terms of your colors and your fonts and your logo and all that stuff is nice. Yep. But the reality of it is, you're a great company, and Nike's the exception. But if you're a great company, you can switch that thing up, and it doesn't really matter a whole lot. Right. Other than my Cleveland Indians, I still haven't forgiven them for killing Chief Wahoo, but that's a whole other podcast. But but the term we like to use is bonding, because in the messaging you're looking to bond with that client, you're looking to connect with that client, and ultimately, and I got this from a mentor of mine by the name of Roy Williams, who's been just phenomenal for my career. But Roy defined branding as when somebody, you become the first person someone thinks of when they have a need for what you have. Yeah. And to do that, you've got to connect with them on an emotional level before they need you. So that's a really key component to all the messaging is, again, I used that phrase before, talking to the dog in the language of the dog. That's what you've got to do with your messaging. It just can't be all about you.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. Well, I love that. I love where we've gone with this: branding versus bonding, getting your messaging right, the strategies that are working right now in mass media, how to start doing benchmarking and take measurements that will give you an idea of the impact of your mass media. Like, we've covered a lot of key things today. If people want to find you, Brian, by the way, our IAN guys, Brian.
Yes.
If you guys want to find Brian, the best place, LinkedIn, is that a good place to start?
LinkedIn's probably the best place. Yeah. And if you just search my name under Elite Media Team, I can come up. Our website is elitemediateam.com, or email's fine, which is real simple. It's brian@elitemediateam.com as well.
Wonderful. Brian, you've been fantastic. I appreciate you kind of dropping a lot of truth bombs, sharing so many insights, 30 years of wisdom, guys, coming out into about 35 minutes of content, 40 minutes of content. So thanks again, Brian. We sure appreciate
you having me. I really do. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate all you do as well. I'm really enjoying working with you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Brian.